Welcome inside Black and Gold. Steve Geller, Jeff Nowak, and been kind of busy despite being in the quote-unquote dead period right now of the NFL. Get into a bunch with the assistant coaching hires for Kellen Moore. It's been interesting to keep up with and seeing just how many connections he has with some of these guys that are now coming to New Orleans. And also we just got word as we're started recording this podcast that there is an internal elevation that we kind of expected on that coaching staff as well. Ton to get into though this episode, and me as an Eagles fan still flying high from the Super Bowl. I can't get enough of the Kendrick Lamar, whatever people are putting out there in memes or reels, whatever. I'm eating it all up.
Yeah, no, it's weird because there's a lot of information, there's a lot of news, but there also isn't, because it's not like an actionable news. It's kind of like, all right, we needed the coach there, we got a coach there. Great. Moving on. And so all until this last one have been relative to the offensive side of the ball. So we'll get into it. There's been 5 hires, a couple guys being retained, and then a few interviews on the defensive side. But all the hires and all the hires have been on the offensive side, right? So we'll go through all those. A lot of young coaches. And I think that's something that the Saints, I don't know if that was their goal going in, but it's definitely true. The Saints have a very young coaching staff, at least on the offensive side of the ball. That could change on the defensive side of the ball as you kind of build this out. But all the elder statesman coaches, they're gone, and you kind of just have this youth movement here. So we'll go through all of that in this first segment. Second segment, I want to play an interview we did with Jeff Morrow. He's a retired sports editor who covered Kellen Moore in high school, and he wrote this really great feature article on the Tri-City Herald, basically explaining that Kellen Moore has always been a football savant. He was that as a high school player, he was that as a college player, and he's been that as a coach. And it's no surprise to him that Kellen Moore is now the youngest head coach in the NFL, getting that job at only 36 years old. So we're going to listen to that interview. And then the final segment, I want to get into their NBC Sports put out those 5, 4, 3, 2, $1 budget things, pick 5 players, make your team. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of go through that. I have a take on Joe Burrow that is Saints specific. And I also think it's worth talking about like how far away the Saints are from having a single player appearing on that type of graphic, because I think that's telling of where they are as a team right now and why Kellen Moore has quite the task ahead of him. But these 6 coaches, or these 5 coaches that were hired, let's just go through them. So Scott Tolzien, quarterbacks coach, Chase Hazlitt, former or the son of Jim Hazlitt, so connections that way, also has worked with Kellen Moore. He's going to be your tight ends coach. He's 32 years old. Scott Tolzien is 37 years old. Brendan Nugent, former Saints offensive line coach, coming back as the Saints offensive line coach. He's 42. Joel Thomas, former Saints running backs coach, took a year, walkabout, sabbatical, if you will, like in New York, coaching their running backs. Now he's back. He's actually 50. So he's probably going to be the oldest coach on the Saints when all is said and done. And then TJ Paginetti, we don't have an official title for him yet. I have to imagine he'll be something with the offensive line for the Saints. He's been with the Eagles forever. I'm honestly surprised that he jumped ship at this point, considering he's been there through multiple coaching tenures and was probably in line. Days. He's probably in line for a promotion. Maybe that's why he decided to leave, because they weren't going to give him the promotion that he probably felt like, I've been here forever, guys. But he was involved with that offensive line that, I think everyone around the NFL would want a piece of that if they could get it. And then, Doug Nussmeier was the other name that we fully expect to be the offensive coordinator. One of the reasons we waited until today was because, hey, maybe they'll just hire Doug so we can talk about it as if it's a hire. Probably will happen this afternoon, right after we finish recording. No doubt. So, that's just how it works. I'm going to talk about it as if he's the offensive coordinator, because I'd be stunned if he's not. But those 5 guys are the hires. Doug Nussmeier would probably be the only domino left to fall. And then you'll have a few assistants down the line where they make decisions on, like a Jari Evans, Kevin Petrie, guys like that. But, any of those names kind of stick out to you? What are your thoughts on that group as a whole?
It was interesting to see, you mentioned the walkabout with Joel Thomas. What the heck happened with the New York Giants that he was like, I'm ready to go back to New Orleans. Sign me back up for what's going on over there. The relationship you've imagined he's built up with Alvin Kamara can only be a plus going forward, though. Coming back with the team, I know you put out there, too, that AK's got to be happy about this. And, it's nice to get your star offensive weapon all about this coaching staff right off the bat, bringing back a guy he's familiar with.
Yeah, so I'm sure something, if it was going great with the Giants, he probably wouldn't have wanted to jump ship, because you talk about, okay, Derek Foster, Saints former running backs coach, he's now with the Cowboys, but that was a scenario where they changed everything, and it was kind of, the writing was on the wall, like, you're not guaranteed a job, you probably won't have a job. So he went and got the running backs coach with the Cowboys, right? I think Joel Thomas leaving was a lot more about, at that point, what was going on with the Saints. And you see, hey, we're going to reset the deck on offense. Probably isn't going to have a job when all is considered then. So I think him departing then was kind of similar to Derek Foster departing this year, of like, I don't know if he ever wanted to leave, but he didn't really have much of a choice, and he found an opportunity with the Giants. He went and took it. All that said, Joel Thomas doesn't really have a connection with Kellen Moore. He's one of the few coaches on this list that doesn't have kind of a direct coaching connection with Kellen Moore. And I think this hire is a lot more about Alvin Kamara than it is necessarily about, hey, I desperately want Joel Thomas here, as I'm Kellen Moore and I desperately want to bring in Joel Thomas. I want to go get a coach who's going to coach my star running back, and my star running back's going to be happy about it. Right. And, and I wouldn't advocate for that in any other room. Right. Quarterbacks coach, you might say the same thing. It's a small room. There's only one or two guys that you're really focusing on. But at the same time, I need that quarterbacks coach to be able to translate what I'm trying to do to my quarterback. And I need him to be able to kind of be that go-between, whether it's Derek Carr, whether it's somebody else. That's an important relationship that is more about information than it is about the quarterback liking that guy. And obviously you need that to happen as well. But I think Scott Tolzien, as a former quarterback, he can do that. I'm not worried about that.
Right.
The running back room is probably the only room on the team where I will hire a coach to make one guy happy. Because at the end of the day, Alvin Kamara is the guy. Kendre Miller, Jamal Williams, you draft a running back, whatever. I'm pretty comfortable that Joel Thomas can work with those guys. But if I bring in a running back coach and Alvin doesn't like him, then that's done. Then that room is shot. And I've said early on, like, if I'm Kellen Moore, one of my biggest priorities on day one is to get Alvin on my side.
Absolutely.
It's to make sure that Alvin, who I would argue is the leader of that locker room, you can say it's Derek Carr, you can say it's the quarterback, whatever. If you don't have Alvin, you don't have that locker room, at least not the offensive side of the equation. And I think Joel Thomas is a big, like, he was around for Alvin's entire career. Alvin Kamara is in year 9? He was drafted in 2017. So year 8, I lost track, but all but one of those seasons, Joel Thomas was his running backs coach. So, I genuinely think, like, that is not about Kellen Moore being like, I like this guy, It's about, okay, who does Alvin want to be his running backs coach? I'm going to go get him.
No, that makes a boatload of sense. Getting your star player at ease. And, it's someone that Joel Thomas, he's got that rapport with Kamara. And it's not just even, the X's and O's stuff, just being off the field, having someone to lean on, a voice that he can, sound some things off, and that'll get back to Kellen. If KK doesn't, feel comfortable with going right to the coach, you got a voice in a guy like Joel Thomas around that. I don't know. It just seemed like a smart move all the way around, just because the experience, obviously Thomas has been here before. And like you said, making AK happy is definitely priority at number one with this squad.
Yeah, and Joel's funny because it's like, you look up this list of like, oh, there's young coaches, and you look at a picture of Joel and you're like, oh, he must be a young guy. And he's like, no, right. He's 50. He just aged very well. He's a young looking 50, but he's probably going to be, if they hire Doug, he'll be the second oldest coach on this coaching staff. Doug Nussmeier is 54. We'll get to him in a minute. The other guy that I think is interesting. So
I always felt like Joel Thomas too just looked like a dude that could hurt somebody.
Yes. Yeah. He looks like a guy who's played running back, and he has, like, he still owns like career records at Idaho where he was the star running back, right? Yards and touchdowns, a former Vandal, if you will. And, but there is one other guy who's coming back. His departure was a lot longer in that Brendan Nugent was the running backs coach. I'm sorry, the offensive line coach. I got it, from 2015 through 2021. He left. He ended up on the Chargers, where he crossed paths with Kellen Moore. They were on the same staff in 2023. It was an ugly season in terms of the head coach got fired and everything kind of was sent out in that way. But they at least have a working relationship. That said, if you had to tell me, okay, if you ask me who are the two best offensive players the Saints have, answer one would be Alvin Kamara. Answer two would be Eric McCoy. And these two coaching hires are now reuniting those two players with the guys that they worked with at the start of their career and helped kind of blossom into star professionals. Cesar Ruiz also worked with Brendan for a couple years prior to Doug Marrone taking over, which his tenure, I would argue, was an unmitigated disaster. It was a terrible decision. They shouldn't have ever made it. It was a relationships decision. It was, in my opinion, if you have to look and say, where are the fingerprints from Mickey Loomis on this coaching staff over the last few years that really held things back? It was Doug Marrone getting that job. And so you're kind of getting back from that. And so, I think Brendan did a great job with that offensive line. He had a lot more pieces to work with at that point, because you're talking about, Eric McCoy, Ryan Ramczyk, Teron Armstead, Andres Pete, even. Like, people want to trash Andres Pete. He was a Pro Bowl guard for a long time in the NFL.
Right.
Even Larry Warford had a Pro Bowl season with the Saints. So I don't know if that's as specific about, like, hey, Eric, do you like this guy? But I do think that Eric does like Brendan Nugent, and reuniting with a former coach in that way is probably going to be helpful. So we'll see how that goes. But, I am of the belief that making sure your star players on offense are happy is a smart thing to do when you make these coaching hires. And to be fair, I thought John Benton did a great job last year, given the circumstances. He turned Trevor Penning into a serviceable player, which I didn't know was possible.
Right.
He helped develop. Tali Fuaga had a great rookie season. You got to give him credit for that. John, give him credit for that. He had the guys switching positions, a rookie left tackle starting all 17 games. So
was he part of the jettison to Seattle?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah. If you want to watch the Saints, the 2024 Saints, go to the Seahawks, or at least on offense.
Right.
If that offense starts like lighting up the NFL the way the Saints did the first couple weeks, because I don't think that the issue with the offense last year was Clint Kubiak. I think it was the injuries, and it was there was a point that you just couldn't get it done. But we'll see. If that offense completely flails and is terrible, then we're like, oh, maybe it was Clint Kubiak.
It'll be curious to see. He's got a decent quarterback there, some weapons, wide receiver and running back. So I'm curious to see what Kubiak can do with the Seahawks.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if I had to compare two quarterbacks in the NFL of like, okay, who's the most similar to Derek Carr in terms of where they are in their careers and how old they are and what they're able to do, it's probably Geno Smith. I think these two are very, very similar players.
I think that's fair.
They took different routes because Geno had to be a backup for however long before, Geno is the reason Ben McAdoo got fired in New York. It's one of the funniest subplots I've ever seen play out, in the sense that Ben McAdoo got fired shortly after trying to bench Eli Manning, who at that point had never missed a game in his NFL career, for Geno Smith. And the outrage at that point was like, well, this isn't even worth doing. He's Geno Smith. We know he's not worth anything. And then like 4 or 5 years later, you have Geno Smith. Suddenly he's like one of the top quarterbacks, and he's getting this extension in Seattle. And, I don't know if he's still in that kind of middle class of quarterbacking, but it's just funny because as you think Ben McAdoo's sitting at home, like, guys, this is like, I was right, you were wrong. Eli Manning got his way, but he ended his consecutive starts stint early. But that's neither here nor there. Clint Kubiak has Geno Smith now, and I feel like Geno Smith, Derek Carr are in a very similar conversation in terms of quarterbacking. Just a couple more. Keith Williams is going to stay on as the wide receivers coach. Smart move. We've already talked about that. Don't need to get into it a ton more. And so the next question is, okay, offensive coordinator Doug Nussmeier. As I said, I would be stunned if it's not Doug Nussmeier. And one of the reasons is you look at, okay, where has Doug Nussmeier gone? And where he's gone over the last 3 years has been anywhere that Kellen Moore is, Doug Nussmeier is. He was with the Cowboys. Right. He was his quarterback's coach with Kellen as an offense coordinator. You go to LA with the Chargers. Kellen Moore's the offense coordinator. Doug Nussmeier is the quarterback's coach. Fast forward to the Eagles. Kellen Moore is the offensive coordinator. Doug Nussmeier is the quarterback's coach. So it would only make sense to bring in another former quarterback. So you'd have 3 former quarterbacks on this staff, and Scott Tolzien, Doug Nussmeier, Kellen Moore. He understands, again, you're talking about translating to the quarterback what the head coach wants. And that's a big ask in year one of a new scheme. I don't see anyone who makes more sense. And this has kind of been the obvious pick from the beginning, but it was obvious because it's the most sensible pick.
And you mentioned it right there, from Dallas to the Chargers to the Eagles. Now it looks like to the Saints, Kellen's basically his right-hand man. And he obviously has immense trust in this dude and another former NFL quarterback on the roster. So you got to like that.
I think he would technically be Kellen's left-hand man. Because
there you go.
Because Kellen's right-hand man would be Doug Nussmeier. So he would be anyway, you got the idea. Yeah. And so I kind of, I look at Doug and I see a very like Pete Carmichael to Sean Payton, right? Like the luster has been kind of taken off of what Pete Carmichael did with the Saints because of his last couple of years as offensive coordinator, was a play calling offensive coordinator and the guy who needed to lead that room. And I would have argued from day one that that's really not Pete's personality. That's not what he is as a coach. That's not where he was going to succeed. He is at his best when he can be in the background game planning. He's a football brain. He doesn't need to be leading that room. And I think Doug Nussmeier is similar. He doesn't strike me as a guy who has ambitions of being a head coach, or at least not like at the forefront in terms of, okay. Like, I think he can be that Pete Carmichael to Sean Payton, right? That guy who's just always there as a sounding board, is able to work really well with your head coach who's a play caller. And you need that when you are a head coach, because you can't spend all of your time on the offense. You need someone you can trust, but not someone who's going to try to overpower you in that position. And that's a much more difficult balance to find than I think people realize. Like, a lot of these offensive coordinators, they're looking at the ladder. They're talking, okay, what's my next step up this ladder? And they might not be focused on like, okay, how do I best support this guy, knowing that I'm probably never going to get out of this position in that way. Like, Pete Carmichael was a perfect example of that, and they worked really well together, he and Sean Payton, for a long time. I think, like, I'm not saying this as a negative on Doug Nussmeier. I'm saying this as a positive about Doug Nussmeier, that he can come in and do a lot of the same things that Pete Carmichael did for Sean Payton, and that's a good thing.
The thing, too, is you have to, I don't know, it says a lot to me that so many guys that are on a Super Bowl champion roster are willing to defect and leave to join Kellen Moore's cause over here. Yeah,
no, I mean, Paginetti's the more fascinating one than anybody, because he's been with the Eagles in some capacity. Well, not since 2013. He had a short stint with Oregon, but then he went back. Like, his entire NFL identity is as a Philadelphia Eagles assistant. He's had several different titles, like quality control, assistant tight ends coach, assistant offensive line coach, whatever, run game specialist. Like, he understands how they built that, and so I don't know. We don't know his official title yet. They would have had to give him some kind of a promotion from where he was to get the job. So maybe he'll be assistant head coach or something like that. I don't know. But it is interesting, because I think you go around the Eagles area right now, and they're just like, how did we lose this guy?
Right.
Like, why is he leaving? He's been here forever. Like, this is his home. So no, I think I think this staff has really come together well. I thought Keith Williams, I would have been disappointed to lose him, and I'm glad they're keeping him.
I saw some nonsense. There's some folks that were upset, saying, oh, still same old Saints, keeping some of the old staff around. And it's not necessarily always a bad thing.
No, and like, if they're the best candidate, you want to keep them. And I think what the implication there is that Mickey Loomis is putting his thumb on the scale and saying, hey, I like this guy, keep him. And I really don't think that's part of it. Now, it's going to be collaborative. It was always going to be collaborative. And when you're talking about a guy in Brendan Nugent, for example, who Kellen Moore worked with for 1 year and was here for 6 years, like, sure, yeah, I'm sure he's bouncing that idea off the wall, and I'm sure Mickey came in and be like, no, we really like Brendan Nugent. That's a good option. You should heavily consider that, right? How do you feel about Keith Williams? We really liked him. The team liked him. Like, that's not a bad thing. You don't want just to scrub everything clean just to scrub everything clean. Now, forcing a guy on somebody is a different conversation, and
we don't want to force anyone.
No, and I think Mickey learned his lesson in that. A couple, as you alluded to this, Phil Galliano is going to stay on as special teams coordinator. That was news that came out today. And that's a good thing, in my opinion. I thought he did a great job filling in over the final 8 weeks for Darren Rizzi as he took over the interim head coach role. One of the things that I don't think has been a problem has been special teams. I think Blake Grupe has been a very, very solid kicker for you, and he's only going to get better. It'll mean probably that you're keeping Charlie Smith around for another training camp battle, unless Darren says, hey, come out to Denver. But I don't know if Will Lutz would appreciate that, because then he would be in that kicking battle. But no, I talked to Charlie pretty extensively in Radio Row, and he was concerned. He was like, I don't know what they're going to do. And what I told him basically was like, hey, if they stay static, you're going to stick around. Like, they're not going to just kick you to the curb just to do that. So, I think
one of the stronger parts of the Saints team too was the special teams, whether it was with Rizzi or Galliano around. So why not keep some of that intact? That makes sense as well.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Like, just changing coaches just to change coaches doesn't benefit you just for the appearance of like being fresh. So I thought that was a smart move. And now the question is going to become, hey, defensive coordinator, what's your scheme? It looks like Brandon Staley's the guy. They did interview Eagles DB coach Christian Parker, Vikings DB coach Durante Jones, familiar name from LSU.
He couldn't coach defense at LSU. I don't want him around here.
Nothing went well that last Ed Orgeron year. They tried to get Ryan Nielsen. He said no. Actually, he said yes, and then Sean Payton talked him out of it.
Exactly.
But anyway, I would expect it to be Brandon Staley. He's another young guy. He's only 42 years old. But I think Brandon, one of the reasons I think he is a very highly effective candidate in this job is going to be he understands what it's like to be a head coach. He can help Kellen Moore in that respect. And one thing that you cannot find in any of these hires so far is a guy with head coach experience at any level, right? Even like if Darren Rizzi had stuck around, you could say, hey, there's some experience there. He was a head coach in college. He at least understands the mechanics of how this is going to work. Right. That's not the case on this staff so far. And so that's why the more you get down this list, the more it makes sense to be Brandon Staley. And there's a reason we're not talking about any defensive hires at this point, and it's because I don't think you can make defensive hires until you have your defensive coordinator.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to, I got a secondary coach, D-line, whatever you got, and then all of a sudden, here's the new defensive coordinator. Look at this staff we picked out for you.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. But I do expect it to happen quickly. Once you get, my assumption is Brandon Staley in that room, it's going to be just like this week. I mean, snap, hire. Right. And the question becomes, does anyone on the staff right now stick around? And I don't think that's, Brian Young is really the only guy that, would make sense. Joe Woods is gone. Michael Hodges is gone. And I say that in the sense that they've already taken other jobs. Not that you're going to kick them to the curb. Like, they're gone already.
No, I wish we could have kept Hodges. I liked him a lot.
I liked Hodges too. Like, I think that's the one coach getting out of the room that I'm like really bummed out about, because I think, say what you want about Zach Bond and his success. That's not on him. He doesn't make those decisions. He doesn't call personnel. He's just on there. Like, the linebackers coach is primarily, so there's game planning, obviously, but his job is development. And if you can say anything about the Saints linebackers over the last 5-6 years, when Michael Hodges has been in charge of that group, it's been development after development after development. Like, you look at even a guy like Alexander Anzalone going and leading the Lions in tackles, right? Like, Caden Ellis was a 7th round pick. Like, we can be all up in arms that they lost him. He developed a 7th round pick into an all-pro caliber linebacker. I don't think he won all-pro, but he's in that range. And Zach Bond, same thing. Like, one of the reasons he was able to go to Philadelphia and succeed as well as he did was that he was developed here. So no, I think that is a loss, but there's linebackers coaches out there, and it's going to be interesting to see if they try to placate a guy like Demario Davis with someone he's worked with before, or some so we'll see. But there's no defensive coach news as of now, but maybe that'll be next week's podcast.
I was expecting things to get wrapped up this week, just because what's next week? Combine.
Yeah, but the position coaches, I don't think have as huge a role in that as you'd think. Like, if you're now, I do think that you're going to want to know what your scheme is. That's going to be the biggest thing. And they may have already decided this. They're not interviewing a single person with a 4-3 background. So it looks, for all the world, like the Saints are going to be switching to a 4-3. And so, that's going to be the biggest story of this draft cycle, is like, okay, find me what positions. Like, you don't want to draft for needs. But when you're getting into the second and third round,
but we need a nose tackle.
Right. Well, you do what do we have? And you're talking about like the musts, the wants, and whatever, right? Like there's going to be a lot more musts on that board on the defensive. If you're going to put those cards up like they do, and you're going to have a whole mess of red on the defensive side, and it's like must. And so that's what you got to figure out at the combine, is because you're going to have to go in there and find out, okay, what are the players we need to add to make this thing work if you do switch to a 3-4 or some sort of hybrid scheme. But that's something we will address down the road. Anything else you want to hit on the coaching before we move on?
Not so much coaching, but Tom Pelissero, NFL Network, just put out Saints are hiring Ted Rath as the director of sports science, perhaps best known as Sean McVay's original Get Back coach, and was most recently the Eagles director of sports performance. So another guy defecting from Philly to NOLA. Like I said, that to me says a whole ton about who Kellen Moore is, able to get these guys to leave a Super Bowl roster.
Yeah, and I think it also probably says a good bit about the purse strings being opened up and offering these guys some money. But yeah, so that probably means Dr. Matt Ray is out. Who I think he's going to get a bad rap because of all the injuries. I actually think he's been good in that job. I think like being more scientific, because this is something the Saints didn't even do prior to him arriving. Like they didn't really have a very scientific approach. They had Dan Dalrymple as their strength and conditioning guy for like 2 decades. So we'll see how that goes, and we'll see if that changes how they approach things in their preparation. But either way,
we need something to shake it up, because what his fault or not, it was just abysmal this season.
Got to be better. Yeah, something had to change. But
right.
All right, let's wrap up that segment. We're going to come back and hear an interview that Steve and I did with Jeff Morrow, former sports editor who covered Kellen Moore in high school, and talked to Tom Moore, his dad, and some really great insight into who Kellen Moore is as a person and what to expect from him as a head coach. So we'll get into that, and then we'll talk about, who's your star in the back end, which, why not? All right. Who dat? This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. Please subscribe. Otherwise, we'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller. Subscribe. And we've got through all the coaching hires. Let's talk about the other coach, the 36-year-old head coach, and
the main man,
who he is. And there's probably no one better to describe that than Jeff Morrow, who covered Kellen Moore as a high school player, who knows his family well. And we got to chat with him on Sports Talk about an article he wrote basically explaining, no, Kellen Moore is not a new football savant. He has always been a football savant. So let's hit it.
Jeff, thank you so much for the time. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you guys?
Fantastic. So what's up? You're retired, but still putting out articles.
Hey, it beats heavy lifting. I that way I keep myself out of my wife's hair. I still like to write. So yeah, I've covered this area for about 40 years now.
Awesome stuff. Got to go through your article, learning a lot more about Kellen Moore. And I know you find out that basically being a kid growing up with his dad as the high school coach, pretty much just lived around the football and around the game constantly.
He just ate it up. And let's not forget his brother, Kirby. The two of them were just a couple years apart. But, yeah, Kellen was just like his assistant coach, Mark Little, said, was a football savant. And Kirby's like that, too. But, I mean, tell me of any eighth grader back in that day that would go online on the new thing called the internet at that time, basically, and look for college quarterbacks who were throwing in games over 400 yards. And that's what Kellen was doing. And Tom Moore, the father, was telling me, he goes, I didn't know what the internet was. And they would get those videotapes, VHS back then, and sit there and watch them together. And it was just one of those deals where, and Mark Little said this, his assistant coach said that, you knew that he wanted to be a really good player, but he also knew that someday he wanted to be a football coach, and that's what's going on right now.
Yeah, when we heard Kellen talk, the other day, yesterday, and he really talked about, Tom and the football family.
Yes.
And we have a 36-year-old head coach who's the youngest head coach in the NFL, but from the perspective of, well, he's been around the game his entire life. He 6 years as a coordinator, 6 years as a player, obviously 4 years at Boise State. But even before that, I'm just curious, the family itself, and just how do you think that's shaped Kellen as he kind of goes into this new role with the Saints?
Well, I think one of the deals that made it so good for him and what he's been doing is that, Tom was that coach that had that town. It was a little town of over 6,000 people. It's a farming community. And Prosser, before Tom got there, was just, they were lucky to be 500, right? And Tom gets there, and they just start to develop this incredible program that's been going on for a number of years before Kellen even gets to put on a uniform. And so he's been around there. One of the former or the head coaches of Richland High School, a big high school around here, said he and Kirby would be dinking around on the sidelines, jumping on the agility equipment. At the same time, they were soaking it all in, and that's what Kellen did. And if the team hadn't been such a good team, and they always seemed to go to the state semifinals, maybe he wouldn't have gotten into it so much. But that winning, it gets contagious.
Looking at, his dad, Tom, what can you tell us about him as a person? Because it's, we're just getting to know Kellen, and it's been kind of hard to read the type of person he is. Yeah, no, first and foremost, everybody I talk to, and I know Kellen myself, and like I said, I covered him in high school, just this great kid, and I think that comes from mom and dad. And what's been really cool to see these last few years is that Tom and his wife, Chris, they decided to move to where Kellen was in Dallas at the time when he was the coordinator for the last couple of years, so that they could be close to, I think, more the grandkids than right.
them. So they have these kids, and so they would help out whenever needed. And then, of course, he left Dallas and went to the Chargers in Los Angeles, and so they moved over there with them. They found their own place. And then, of course, when he went to Philadelphia this last season, then they were living in Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
Wow.
So now Chris, the mother, the grandma, she has put laid the law down on Tom and said they're moving back here to this area because she needs a house to hang the photographs on, the walls. So they want to do that because they're still going to go to the games. They're still going to be there a lot. But she needed a home base, and that's exactly why they're doing that. And so it's a big deal for them. It's family. It's all about family. Same with Kirby and his wife and kids. And then, but that was the way he ran the football program. Everybody that had kids, they were more than welcome to hang around the football program all the time. And I think that was really making it a welcome situation for someone like Kellen to be able to, feel comfortable in that environment. And I don't know if you obviously read that story. I don't know if you relate it, but where he, as a 10-year-old, is telling this offensive lineman,
right,
in the middle of the game, your pro set setup is just too quick. You've got to slow down. You're way faster than this other guy, and you're going to do better. And the coach, who ends up, he's a varsity head coach right now in this area, he's like, you know what? The kid was right, but it really annoyed me.
Yeah, I'm sure people in the NFL have similar feelings when, it's your teammate last year and this year he's your quarterback's coach, which is what the case was with the Cowboys. He was a backup for Dak Prescott, and then the next season he's his quarterback's coach, and the next season he's your offensive coordinator calling plays. It is a unique thing, but that's why when people talk about, the age is a factor because he's so young, but it's like, yeah, but what is the experience, right? Because if you believe that guy and you trust that guy, then that age doesn't really matter.
No, you're right. And I think, what has Dak Prescott ever said anything bad about him? No. I think they enjoyed each other's company. He really believed in Kellen. That, to me, says a lot right there.
Yeah, one thing that has come up a few times with Kellen is, he talks about his notes. He takes notes. Even as a coach, early in his coaching career, he'd be taking notes of how he wanted his head coaching kind of 10 years to go, how he wanted to frame his own structure of what his coaching experience would be. And it kind of, you go back and even reading his story, there's a lot of things in there. Okay, he's taking notes. He's got notebooks full of plays. I heard a story. He went to Boise State for his recruiting visit, and he had a playbook. And like, what are you doing? What is play? What do you mean you have a playbook? And it kind of is funny. I think that is really emblematic of who Kellen is as a person, of like always over hyper prepared. And I don't think you have the type of success he does at Boise State. He's not, like he says, he's not the biggest guy, he's not the strongest guy, but he wins. And I think that preparation and the note taking is kind of a product of that.
No, he loves what he does, and he always has. And so, somebody who really loves what they do, they're always researching, studying, and doing things like taking notes. And then he looks back on them and studies more. So that's just the way he is.
Yeah, obviously you've known him for a long time. What are your expectations for him in this first head coaching job?
Well, I know everybody's written about, is writing about the salary cap and everything, but I think he's going to create a really great situation for the Saints. I think that players are going to love playing for him, especially on offense. I think he's got enough connections out there of who he wants to get. And it's really interesting. Tom mentioned this to me about how he's never realized how much of everything in the NFL is based on a handshake. That you reach out and you talking to this guy or that guy, would you like to come here? I've got these other offers. What do you want to do? So he's in the middle of doing all that right now, obviously putting stuff together. He's going to try to find people that he really trusts. This is just my guess, but one of the first things I thought when he got the job was that maybe he'll bring Scott Linehan back, who was the head coach at St. Louis back before the Rams moved to back to Los Angeles. But Linehan was the guy that really forced or just basically begged Jerry Jones to bring Kellen from Detroit to Dallas back in the day when Linehan was the offensive coordinator. And when he got hurt that one year in training camp, that's when the next year they asked him if you want to be the quarterback's coach. But Linehan grew up and went to high school just about 10 minutes from where Kellen went to in Prosser. So they've known each other for years, and they help each other with clinics. So I think that he might become like just a senior advisor for him, but I think he wants people that he trusts there, but also knows that they can do the job. And I think you'll see that he tries to create a family, just like his dad always did.
Just as a note, Scott Linehan, Kirby Moore were on the same Missouri staff in 2023. Just saying.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one of the things that was kind of surprising in my story was that Tom's really confident that Kirby will be a head coach someday, but in college football is what they're looking at. He was looked at by 3 different universities this last year to be a head coach. So he's pretty confident. And Tom was not surprised at all that Kellen got the job, but he was surprised about how fast it happened. But think about it. Kellen was he interviewed at least with a couple of teams for the last 4 off seasons. So sooner or later it was going to happen, and I'm glad the Saints were able to get him.
All right. Thanks again to Jeff Morrow for coming on. You can check out that article if you want to read it at the Tri-City Herald. I'll have it linked in the show description on YouTube and the podcast player. So if you want to find it there and go read it, I highly recommend it. It's very well done. But Steve, what did you have any takeaways? What were your thoughts on the article on what Jeff had to say about Kellen?
Yeah, I was definitely curious to learn more about what the makeup of Kellen is. Obviously, his dad has this huge influence on him, constantly around him in the high school days, and just being around football. And you just realize the Saints have a football nerd on their hand right now. I mean, that this guy lives it, eats it, sleeps it, whatever you want to say. The fact he's been designing plays forever, just somebody that's so enamored with the game, and it's just exciting to get that fresh, young perspective for an offense going forward in today's NFL game. So I think, the hire overall was definitely, I felt, scrutinized a ton because the Saints waited so long, but they had to because we heard it from Mickey Loomis. The Eagles kept winning, and I feel like they locked in on them and just were patient and waited, and just excited to see what Kellen now can bring to this team that has been mired in the same old forever. It's definitely going to be a whole new look. I mean, there's who knows even though the personnel changes right now with the coming on the field, but just with Kellen Moore in the mix, it's not going to be the same old a la Sean Payton type offense or team.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like the nice way is to say football savant, the less nice way is to say football nerd. But either way, right, you're saying the same thing. It's just the guy who eats, sleeps, breathes football and understands it at a level that defies 36 years, right? Like you would normally look at a 36-year-old and be like, he's got a lot of learning to do. But it's like when you talk about a guy how many people get a head coaching job their first time with more institutional knowledge of the game of football than someone who's been an offensive coordinator for 6 years, played in the NFL for 6 years, started as a college quarterback, won more games than anybody as a college quarterback, and obviously grew up around the game with a high school football coach as his dad. You know, one of the things Jeff talked about that I find really fascinating, and Kellen Moore brought this up in his introductory press conference, is like constantly taking notes. Right. Like, and that's not something that just started when he got to the NFL and he was like taking notes on a clipboard saying like, if I was that coach, I'd do it this way. That's something that started way back in high school. Right. And, you know, he went to his Boise State recruiting trip with a playbook he had developed, and whether that playbook was actually any good or not, the point stands that like, that's not normal. Nothing about this is normal for a guy who's just playing football, grew up as a great football player, because Kellen Moore is not your typical star quarterback. Kellen Moore is not 6'3" with a cannon arm. Like, he's not a 4'4", 40 guy. He probably would have to, you know, train a couple months to get under 5. But, you know, what he is the elite preparation guy. And when that elite preparation guy meets the elite talent guy, then you get Peyton Manning, or you get Tom Brady, or you get whatever. Like, you get a number 1 overall pick. His limitations are what kept him from being that in the NFL. But that doesn't mean you can't be a coach. There's a reason that those elite talent guys meets elite preparation guys don't go into coaching, because they just don't. Like, you don't, like, look at all the great quarterbacks, like the Hall of Fame quarterbacks. How many of them got into coaching? Not many, right? Like, did Peyton Manning ever consider being a coach? Probably not. Did Tom Brady ever consider being a coach? Probably not. Drew Brees people are trying to talk him into it like every day. Every interview he does, people are trying to talk him into being a coach. He doesn't want to be a coach because he spent his whole life around the game. He's like, I did it. Kellen, I think, has always been a coach in making.
The story that a 10-year-old Kellen telling a high school player, offensive lineman, and giving him tips, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, but like, hey guy, you're getting out of your set too quick. You gotta be patient. And you're like, who the hell is this guy? But damn it, he's right. No, and I think why this hire feels so much more positive and forward looking is in the Dennis Allen era. It was always like, let's see how long he survives.
Yes,
because even from year 1, it was like the clock was ticking. And you're like, man. How long is it before he's bad enough, before this team is bad enough that you just have no choice but to hit the eject button? And that was never the case with Sean. Like, the implication with Sean was always, hey, we might struggle a year or two, but we're going to find our way back. Yeah. And I feel like that's what this hire is. This hire is not let's see what happens. This is now the next defined coaching era of the Saints. That is not in the shadow of Sean Payton. That is not a direct line from like, well, we're trying to keep that going. No, this is the Kellen Moore coaching era. And it's finally a situation where like, yeah, this could be the coach for the next 10, 15 years. It's got to go well. You got to get things right eventually, but not in year 1, probably not in year even 2 or 3. Like, you've got to build towards something. And it feels like you have a guy who is of the age and of the experience that you're willing to do that with. And that was never the case with Dennis Allen. It probably wouldn't have been the case with Darren Rizzi if you stuck with Darren Rizzi. That would have felt like the same, like, oh, we'll see, this is kind of a trial period.
Run it back, right?
Like, no, we have bought the Kellen Moore experience, and there are no refunds. Like, we're in it. And hopefully it goes well. I feel good about the fact that it can go well.
That's one thing we haven't heard yet is the terms of the contract with the Saints, how many years he's got.
Yeah, a lot of times those aren't disclosed ever. I'd be surprised if there aren't some pretty steep guarantees on it of like Dave Canales when he went to the Panthers. It was like, you know, basically getting a hazard pay because they've fired their last 2 head coaches like really early on. And I don't think you need to do that with the Saints, but I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to sweeten the pot a little bit just to make sure. Because, you know, but I felt like they were pretty confident they were going to pull him in. You sent me a link to somewhere they were saying, oh, they accidentally made a great hire. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, he was one of their first interviews. Like, they wanted Kellen Moore, whether he was their top option. And I don't think that's really how teams operate. I don't think they have like, oh, this is our top guy. And then if we miss out on him, they'll have kind of a cloud of like, okay, who are viable options? And he was definitely in that cloud from the beginning. Where you would rank them, who knows? But at the end of the day, they got a Super Bowl winning offensive coordinator. So I don't think there's anything accidental about that. But yeah, anything else you want to add before we move on?
No, just excited to see what now to the Kellen at the Combine, another episode of Saints action to see what happens there. Curious, how many interviews he'll end up doing in Indianapolis.
I'm also curious as to whether Kellen Moore is a fan of the Hard Knocks experience, because we don't know that. Because forever it was like Sean Payton was like, I don't want it. Dennis Allen was also like, I don't want it. Who's to say Kellen Moore isn't like, yeah, bring him on in, because they are very much not this year, because first year head coaches are exempted unless they ask for it. But if they miss the playoffs next year, that could very much be a Hard Knocks experience. So
no, that's a great point. He might have that newer thinking of the exposure is good for him and the team.
Yeah, you never know. But hey,
no, I'm just saying that the whole experience would be kind of surreal too, just to be like, wait a minute, we're at training camp, and then we're also going to watch Hard Knocks, which we're at. Training camp would be weird.
I would hate it so much. It would just add something else that I had to pay attention to and like report on. Because there would inevitably be stuff that like didn't come out during the week that came out on Hard Knocks. It's just right.
It's like, how can't Saints radio have that?
Yeah. But all right, let's wrap up this segment. We're going to come back. We're going to go through an NBC Sports budget list to make a team. I have a rant that I wanted to go on. It's really the only reason we're doing this, because I have a pretty strong rant that I want to hit. Either way, this is Inside Black and Gold. Thanks everyone for listening. We're going to come back one more segment. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. Stick around. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller. I do, as we were just talking about in between segments, my dog is fine. Anyone who's wondering, she had to get staples in her paw because she cut it on a nail. Fun way to spend my Saturday afternoon, but I appreciate everyone who reached out. Yeah, the dog's fine. She's sitting right behind me. She's mad because it's time for a walk and I'm not taking her. But that's because we have one more segment to record. And in this segment, I want to do something we don't typically do, which is talk about other teams. But I did think that there was this graphic that came out. NBC Sports put it out.
You do a good job of tying it to the Saints, though.
We'll see. We'll see how that goes for me. But I sent this to you when it came out, and I figured, hey, we could talk about this at some point. But it's just one of these budget lists. They give you $15. They give you lines of $5, $4, $3, $2, $1, and you got to pick 5 players to build your roster. And so I tweeted this. If you want to find it on my Twitter account at Jeff_Nowak, you can look at it. Obviously, YouTube, you can see it. But it'll be linked. We'll have a link to it in the podcast feed as well. So if you want to go find it, so you have an idea of what we're talking about, I will read through it. But these are always funny to me because I think it's interesting. It's kind of a pseudo, hey, this is how we rank players versus like, okay, what's the value of those players? And to me, the most telling thing about this for the Saints is just how far they are away from even having a player appearing on this list. Because, you look at the $1 players and you're talking about Joe Burrow, Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Ladd McConkey, Sam Laporta. So you wouldn't exactly call that a murderer's row of options, but that's the 5th tier on this list. And how far away are the Saints from even pushing that tier with anybody? Like,
yeah, we would just pray and hope that Olave could get in the $1 range.
I would say Alvin is probably the closest to that range. Because I think, Drake London, Ladd McConkey, in terms of like, yeah, I mean, I guess if Olave was healthy for a full season and you saw what happened, but in terms of today, I don't think Chris Olave is anywhere near that list. I mean, he's coming off a season where he played in 8 games total, 7 probably. But Alvin at least had, one of his better seasons. I would put him up there in the range of Bijan. I don't think Bijan is head and shoulders above him. So if you wanted to make an argument for anyone on this list, it would be Alvin. But even then, I'm like, is he though? Like, you're talking about a 30-year-old running back. So I don't know. Like when you're talking about the Saints, you're talking about, okay, how far away are they from being a title team or being a playoff team? I mean, like the Falcons weren't a playoff team. They got 2 players on this list.
Yeah, that sucks.
Now, not every team has someone on here. So, we'll kind of go through it. So the quarterbacks, the quarterback in the $5 range is Josh Allen, then $4 Lamar Jackson, 3 Pat Mahomes, 2 Jalen Hurts, 1 Joe Burrow. Running backs, $5 Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry 4, Jahmyr Gibbs 3, Josh Jacobs 2, Bijan Robinson 1. Then receivers, there are 2 in the 5 range: Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, $4 Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 3 Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors. A lot of LSU going on here. Then $2 CeeDee Lamb, Terry McLaurin, Drake London, Ladd McConkey, and then the tight ends $5 down is Brock Bowers, 4 Travis Kelce, 3 George Kittle, 2 Trey McBride, 1 Sam Laporta. So that's a list. And, it's a lot of LSU on this list.
Yes, sir. I'm surprised he could have even, I'm trying to think who you could take off to have Jaden in there, but whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Jaden, I think.
Not yet. Right.
The funny thing to me is I think Joe Burrow is the best quarterback on this list.
I'm with you. I saw that. I'm like, $1 for Burrow, sold.
Yeah, right. Like if this was a real thing where you could actually do this, it would be like, that's the cheat code. But the team success for these 4 other guys is what has them up higher on this list. But I'm sorry. Like I watched Joe Burrow play football and I'm like, that's the best quarterback in the NFL. Now I'm talking about quarterback. I'm not talking about, okay, who's going to rush for the most yards, who's going to run for touchdowns. I'm talking about a guy who's going to get back there with the ball in his hands and find somebody. And you could say that's not what you're looking for as a complete quarterback. But I don't know. Like when I look at Joe Burrow, I look at the modern Drew Brees, right? And just the way he's talked about what he's able to do physically. He's the type of guy who's probably already been robbed of 2 MVPs, but has 1 comeback player of the year. Sound familiar? Because that's exactly what happened to Drew Brees throughout his career. The difference is Drew Brees didn't have to. Drew Brees started with the Chargers and ended up going with the Saints, and that's kind of his genesis of becoming the crazy maniacal, like I'm going to do it. Joe Burrow had that happen in college, a little different because it was Ohio State to LSU, and so you could argue it started a little earlier. But I feel like Joe Burrow is going to be this guy throughout his career that is objectively a top 5 quarterback, but no one ever talks about as being the best quarterback because for a few things, one being his team is constantly letting him down. But who's made a Super Bowl? Joe Burrow. Right. Who hasn't? Josh Allen. Who hasn't? Lamar Jackson. Now, Pat Mahomes and Jalen Hurts are different conversations, but like the way we talk about Joe Burrow does not make any sense to me. And the way people talk about Drew Brees throughout his career didn't make any sense to me because anyone who watched Drew Brees is always like, dude, this is a top quarterback. This is probably the best quarterback in the NFL. But then he'd be like, I didn't go to enough Super Bowls. So he wasn't. I
think you said it right there. Like, I don't know if enough people are actually watching or just seeing some of the highlights, but to see what like an entire game of what these guys are doing.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, if Joe Burrow had like a top 20 defense, he's the MVP this year because they win 12 games and go to the playoffs. Like, I watched so many Bengals games this year. I don't know why I ended up watching so many Bengals games, but like,
did you have Jamar in fantasy? I hope so.
I had Joe in fantasy.
Okay.
But I mean, there was like 3 or 4 games that they lost that it was like, how the hell did they lose this game? Every time Joe got the ball, I think the Ravens game.
That sounds familiar too.
They were up 10 points like 3 different times against the Ravens. And it was like, the only way the Bengals are going to win is if they get the ball last. That's the only way. There was 2 games that they lost on kicks. Like there's a game against the Chargers they lost, and it was like they set up Evan McPherson like twice inside 50 yards for go-ahead kicks. He missed both. And I remember that game because I had Evan McPherson in fantasy. But also like this is a guy who is getting, it reminded me of the Drew Brees, like the 2014 through 2016 teams, right? Because it was like he's dialed in. He's dominating. And his defense just cannot do anything. And it's not an issue of them being hurt. It's an issue of they're not good. And the same thing could be said for his offensive line. His first few seasons, like his knee gets torn up because of his offensive line, right?
My wife's dream, at least, is for Joe eventually to end up with the Saints, but she feels like that'll be in the way later years of his career.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who's won comeback player of the year twice. Drew only had to win it once.
To your point, too, even with the offense, we know Jamar Chase won the Triple Crown and didn't get a sniff of really any award. Didn't get any awards on NFL honors.
It's like Marcus Colston, right? Like it never made a Pro Bowl, right?
Wow.
But either way, like I will die on this hill that Joe Burrow is the new Drew Brees. And
Drew did get a Super Bowl, so I hope that for Joe at least.
Well, that's the thing. Like, but I mean, making it to it's funny because making it to a Super Bowl, you could argue that they probably should have won that Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Either way, it's like, Drew made it and won, Joe made it and lost, but the mechanics around it are the same. Of like, he got all the way there. Like, that's not something that a lot of players in the NFL can say. And he did it in year 4, year 5 after coming back from a major knee injury. Anyway, so all that is to say, I look at this list, and to me, it's like if it starts with anyone but Joe Burrow, it's the wrong answer because that you have $15 to spend. That $1 on Joe Burrow is like a cheat code. Because I mean, you could just rebuild that LSU offense if you wanted. You could go Burrow, Chase, Jefferson, and then just figure it out from there. It's a pretty good, that would be 11. So you could get 2 more $2 players. You could go. The only thing is like Trey McBride. I don't know why Trey McBride is not the 4th best tight end in football. Like, I like Trey McBride, but what's your list? Give me your list, and then we can go through it.
I did it I went Chase, Jamar Chase, then went to Amon-Ra St. Brown, loaded up on my wide receivers.
Okay.
George Kittle was my $3 pick. Then Josh Jacobs, then Joe Burrow. But I like I said to you before getting into this, I liked how you did it. I kind of went with the standard. I went each row and picked one. You didn't necessarily go that route, and you were left. I love that you said, and $1 left over to tip the bartender.
Yeah, there's no rules says you have to pick.
No, you're right.
Yeah, it's just like I got money. I'm gonna spend it however I see fit. So yeah, I didn't go row by row, but I start with Joe Burrow, and the thing is like, yeah, I could have picked Trey McBride to fill out my $15, but I think Sam Laporta is a better player. Like, I don't know why Sam Laporta is lower on this list than Trey McBride. I don't want Trey McBride. I want Sam Laporta. So I'm going with 2 $1 players, and that's Joe Burrow and Sam Laporta to start with. So that's $2 spent. I got all my money because I love that. I love that combination, man. Then from there, I'm picking Saquon because we just saw what Saquon can do for an offense. Yeah. Like, we're not talking about the Giants. We're not talking Saquon on the trash team. We're talking Saquon with Joe Burrow. Hell yeah. Hells to the yeah. Now, then the question becomes, okay, because I now that makes it so I lose my ability to pair up Joe Burrow with his 2 college wide receivers, but I still want one of them. And I don't know. I love me some Jamar Chase. I just want to see Joe Burrow with Justin Jefferson. So I'm going with Justin Jefferson rather than Jamar Chase. This isn't reality, so I don't have to worry about chemistry. All I know is I think Justin Jefferson is the best wide receiver in the NFL, and Jamar Chase is number 2. There's plenty of LSU wide receivers to choose from. So that puts
you have to worry about Joe and Jefferson connection, any chemistry there. That'll be fine.
Right. Exactly. It's not like I'm picking, Puka. So that puts me at $12. And I'm sorry. No, let's put me. Okay. Joe, Laporta, Saquon, Justin Jefferson. Yeah. That's $12. That's $12. Yeah. So I'm picking a wide receiver. I could either go Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors. That's the wrong era of LSU. I'm not interested in that. I'm not just picking LSU players, just to pick LSU players. And in my opinion, the current most underrated wide receiver in the NFL, the guy that is as elite as they come, but never gets talked about that way, is Terry McLaurin. It's scary. Terry. And if I compare Justin Jefferson, Terry McLaurin, Joe Burrow, Saquon Barkley, Sam Laporta, you're not beating me. You're not beating me. I'm sorry. I am winning every game because Terry McLaurin's going to run right through your face. I don't need finesse. Because go watch the Commanders. Like, one of the reasons Jaden Daniels was able to have the season he was able to have is that Terry McLaurin is a friggin' Hoover vacuum. Anything in his vicinity, he's taken, and he's getting 10 to 15 more yards on it after the catch. So that's my list. It's Joe Burrow, Sam Laporta, Saquon Barkley, Justin Jefferson, Terry McLaurin. Take it to the bank. And as you said, got $1 left to tip the bartender.
Ding, ding, ding. That's the big winner right there.
Because someone's handing these out. I don't want them to go away empty-handed. So that's
it's kind of wild. You mentioned the heavy LSU influence, but man, oh man, there just hasn't been that guy in the backfield for the Tigers of late and running back.
It's because Clyde Edwards-Helaire only got to the Saints this year. Next year, he's going to be on this list, man.
And he is coming back.
He is coming back. I have hope. I have probably unrealistic high hopes for what he can do with the Saints. I think there's a level of comfortability that he did not have with the Chiefs ever, and he'll have with the Saints, and hopefully that can kind of create that environment for him where he can succeed. And maybe so. I mean, he's only 25.
I know.
You know, like if he can kind of come back and be kind of that second fiddle to Alvin this year, I don't know. You'll get it basically for free. Like, it's not going to cost you anything. I mean, like, because he can't do less than Jamal Williams.
Exactly. That's pretty hard to do.
I mean, come on. And you're paying Jamal $3 million over 12 or $12 million over 3 years. Like, but anyway.
My hope too is that Hilaire somehow, some way ends up pushing Kendra Miller to be a better and healthier back.
Yeah, well, we'll see if they draft a guy. I like Trevion Henderson, the guy out of Ohio State. We'll see if they bring somebody in, and that makes it a lot more difficult to make that roster. And you know, I'd be surprised if you cut Kendre outright, but I don't know if he gets another training camp injury and you're just on the shelf. And now we're talking about
he's watching from the sideline. It's like whatever.
And we're talking about a regime that was not in part of drafting him. I think that leash gets a lot shorter. That it's like cut your losses and move on becomes a much more. It wasn't realistic last year, and not for the second year player. With a new head coach, and you know that already. You know, I think they'll give him kind of a clean slate, just the same way Darren Rizzi did. But that only lasts as long as it lasts. So we'll see. But
that's something too. Hopefully, Joel Thomas can get the best out of Kendra, because man, oh man, we've talked about it way too much. As saying, oh, we've seen these flashes. It's just, can you stay on the damn field?
I mean, he had him as a rookie. He didn't do it then. So we'll see. Either way, that's it. That's the podcast. That's it. We're going to wrap it up. Thanks again to Jeff Morrow for chatting with us. Kellen Moore got most of his offensive coaching staff in, got a special teams coordinator. Now we're on to the defense. That'll probably be what next week's pod is about. But thanks as always for everyone listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. We are in year 4. Isn't that crazy? Of this podcast. We're getting in a draft.
We made it. What people are going to say, is it a coincidence that since you guys started the podcast, the Saints haven't been to the postseason?
It's starting to feel like we are directly responsible for that.
We are definitely the reason.
Yeah. Yep. Sorry, guys. I hate to break it to you, but we have cursed the team. They will never be good as long as we talk about them.
Oh, well.
Oh, well. Anyway, who dat? Go Saints. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Be easy, y'all.
Who dat?
Peace.